Hello everybody and welcome, I am Bricker Boom, and we're jumping across the continent and heading into Johto. Now, if you saw my last video of fixing the Kanto gym leaders, we're going to be doing the exact same thing today. As an added bonus, we'll actually be revisiting Kanto. Since this is a different game and a few years later, it does make sense to revisit them. Now, I will be honest, for the most part, most of them are pretty okay at this point. Just like before, we'll be reviewing each team and making sure that it's a diverse team in regards to the Pokemon used while still keeping the general typing. First of all, I do want to say I am well aware of this game being riddled with problems. To name a few, the levels of the gym leaders. Even after you battle the Elite Four, you run into gym leaders that are around the same level, and then all of a sudden, you go to fight Red, and he's sending out a level 80 Pikachu. Also, a lot of Johto Pokemon are objectively weaker than Kanto Pokemon, which makes for slightly awkward gameplay. But the biggest issue, in all honesty, is within the gym leaders, not even the levels themselves. It's the fact that they rarely use Johto Pokemon. But there's no sense just talking about that. Let's go ahead and dive on in. First up is Falkner, and I think you're going to notice basically with every Johto gym leader is an overabundance of Kanto Pokemon. So for Falkner, I'm fine keeping the Pidgeotto because I think a Noctowl would be a little too hard on someone, especially given the fact that it can learn things like Confusion very early. But what I think we should do is replace Pidgey with Hoothoot. If we do that, I'd like to go a step further, take Hoothoot out of the Bellsprout Tower. This way, when it's introduced to a gym leader Pokemon, it's something completely new and different. With Bugsy, I think Scyther as an ace is great, because if we're being honest, a Scizor at this level would be rough. Same with a Heracross. So we'll focus on the Cocoon Pokemon. First of all, I think Metapod should be replaced with a Pokemon like Ladybot. And then with Kakuna, I think replacing it with Spinarak. Overall, both Pokemon aren't nearly as weak as Cocoon Pokemon, but I still feel like they're not so strong that they're going to make this gym a complete brick wall. Scyther is still a horrifying Pokemon with U-Turn, but by now you should have a second stage starter. You'll have had the ability to have caught a Geodude in previous tunnel and even on a previous route, so even if you're playing at a Nuzlocke level, you should still have some sort of type advantage going into this unless you just have failed to catch everything and your starter, depending on who you chose, is dead. Next up is Whitney, and I think if we change her team, it would possibly change it too much. Adding in something like a Dunsparce due to the fact that it is a defensing rollout monster as well, I think it would make it too hard. I think Jigglypuff would either be way too easy, or it'll get a sing-off, and it'll give Whitney a chance to swap and roll out all over your hopes and dreams. So with that being said, I think keeping her team the same is the best bet. My advice, if you're able to, go to the north of Goldenrod, and there's actually a chance you'll run into Machop in the grass. Miltank having rollout, Milk Drink, Attacked, and the ability to hit Ghosts makes her a force to be reckoned with, and an absolute crybaby when she loses, so I wouldn't change anything. With Morty, we actually come across one of the bigger problems in the Johto games, and that's the lack of Ghosts being introduced. The only one that is actually introduced is Mischievous, and it's pretty weak, but it's about as strong as a first stage Pokemon in Ghastly, so we're going to go ahead and replace Ghastly with Mischievous, Arbok with the Haunter, and then Golbat to cover the other Haunter, just as fun, kind of a fun little callback to Agatha of the Elite Four. And now, this is something I'd like to address now that we're halfway through the video. First off, I want to start by saying that I adore the second generation games. It was a fun callback to go back to Kanto, fighting Red, seeing how far Team Rocket unraveled after everything, but you can't have a Johto game without introducing any Johto Pokemon. I understand that primarily, most Johto Pokemon are quite weak in comparison to their counterparts, but just give them a small buff. I do want to give a shout out to a ROM hack. I'm not sure if it's finished, if I'm being honest, so you may have to do some digging, but there is a ROM hack being created with an actual Johto team for the gym leaders. I don't know if they're picking anywhere near what I have, but they are trying to make the game actually more Johto-centric, and with that, it's time to go ahead and move on to Chuck. Next up, we have Chuck, and I'm gonna be honest, I despise how he has just 2 Pokemon, especially being the technical 5th gym leader. However, the problem is, with this part of the game, you can fight Bryce, Jasmine, then Chuck, in basically any order, but him being the 7th gym leader and only having 2 Pokemon is actually worse. I would personally pick to replace Primeape with Hitmontop because they both have the same BST. Poliwrath, I would say that I want him to have a Heracross because they're both similar. And honestly, if I were to go further, I'd like him to have 1 to 2 more Pokemon, like Tyrogue, and then he can even have the Primeape or a Poliwrath if he really wants to. We have a lot of fighting types that we could choose from, he just didn't. Moving on to Jasmine, I think the main thing that we need to do is go ahead and replace the Magnemite. Now, an argument could be made for her to have Ampharos. She obviously knows a good deal about this Pokemon, given the fact that she took care of it. However, if not that Pokemon, I would give her a Fortress. This Pokemon is fun, and if you picked a Fire Starter, you'll be fine to face it. If we decide to have both of the Magnemite swapped, since we're trying to get rid of a lot of Kanto Pokemon, I think a good swap would be Skarmory. This was a very strong Steel type that was introduced, and I don't think anybody, even in the base game, uses it. And there's no sense in that. It's a good Pokemon, especially when it was introduced. Moving on to Gym 7, and it's an interesting one. Like we've said, we know that Gym 5 through 7 was designed to give a pseudo-open world kind of feel, but overall it just made the middle half of the game weak. Another gym leader that should have a 4th, maybe 5th Pokemon being Price. But to start things, I would immediately replace Seal with Sneasel. It would be a great representation of the Dark Pokemon, a decent Ice type, and can prepare you for the rival Sneasel that he has later on. If we were to add a Pokemon, unfortunately about the only thing that I can think of is Jinx for Ice types, so maybe not. Maybe Lapras? I don't know. There are a lot of Pokemon in Gen 1, like Lapras, that actually, despite being rare, had a little bit of representation in the anime. Jinx is one that, I mean, it's got nothing but bad media. Last to the gyms is Claire, and this is basically the same problem with Dragon Pokemon that we have with Ghosts. You have so few to choose from, and in this game, you only added 1 new Pokemon, and it wasn't even its own Pokemon. It was an evolution. Kingdra is a fine evolution, as much of a pain that it is. Dragonair is fine, because we only have 1 other evolution line to choose from. Since she has seemed to train with Lance, I would actually replace the other Dragonair with Charizard. It would give her a good variety, and again, it nicely prepares you for Lance. While his Pokemon are much higher leveled, and the Dragonair are evolved, I think this works well, and it's the best I could think of given the limited type of dragon Pokemon there are. Next, we move on to the Elite Four, and Will is the first one up, and Xatu is definitely fine to keep in there. However, he has 2 of them, and I think replacing it with Espeon is a good call, and that's the only change that we actually need to make. This actually allows a decent mixture of both Johto and Kanto Pokemon, and I think it's a good way to kind of bridge that gap between the 2 continents and show that we're going to be moving into high-level Pokemon from that region, because when that first happened in the base game, we didn't really have the internet then, because I'm old, and just seeing that actually happen was mind-blowing at the time. Koga, someone that actually got promoted, and I have to say, his team is perfect. He has an awesome diversity between both Gen 1 and Gen 2 with more Gen 2 Pokemon, and even a 3rd form evolution in that. So, I think moving on is the best bet. Now, Bruno did 2 things in this generation, and both of them are absolutely great. First off, he kept true to his fighting team. The second thing he did between Gen 1 and Gen 2 was get rid of that second Onix and replace it with Hitmontop. The only thing I would like to see is the same thing with Chuck from before. Replace the second Onix with Heracross to give him the full team of fighting Pokemon, and again, give Johto some more representation. Onyx is horrible anyway, you don't want it on your team. Last up is Karen, and there isn't any Pokemon specifically that wants to speak to a manager. On a real note, I do think that her team is actually pretty solid. Umbreon and Houndoom are both fantastic Pokemon. While Murkrow is a bit weak, I do think that it's a fine Pokemon. The main thing I would do is lead off with Murkrow to get the weaker Pokemon out of the way, but other than that, I think we're good to go. Last up is Lance, and I hate it. I really do. I actively hate the lack of Dragon type. So, what I would do is replace one Dragonite with Tyranitar. It's a pseudo-legendary Pokemon, just like Dragonite, and one that is horribly underrepresented in the game given its location. And then, despite facing it with Claire, I'd love to see one of the Dragonite that he has also replaced with Kingdra. I understand why he has 3 Dragonite when you look back at Red, Blue, and Yellow, but come on, it's boring to fight the same Pokemon, and honestly, as long as you have an Ice Beam Pokemon, you're gonna be able to sweep through his team anyway, so what's it matter? As we move on with Kanto, I'm gonna be honest, the only 2 gym leaders that I would actually want to fix anything from is Surge and Janine. For Surge, he has 2 Electrodes, and I think replacing one of those with Lantern, because it got 0 representation in the game, would be a lot of fun. And then as for Janine, I think replacing Ariados with Muck to make it look more like Koga's team, since they're related, would be a good call. All of the gym leaders within the Kanto region, despite having very somewhat weak Pokemon, actually have a pretty diverse team, so I'm good with every other gym leader in that game, or in that region. For the rival, because we're going to be going off of, I think his anime name is Silver? Maybe? I think his team is fine. He has a pretty solid, diverse team from both Johto and Kanto, so nothing to change there. And then finally with Red, I also think that he has a solid team. Mainly my problem with so many of the gym leaders in the game is the fact that we're wanting to celebrate the diversity of 2 different regions, but Gen 1 is getting used as such a crutch, and we don't necessarily need it. But, as always, if you want to see more videos like this, whether it be cutting out duplicates, focusing on a region, or making a championship team, whatever, let me know. I love building teams for people, and if you haven't yet, make sure to check out Pokemon by Daylight. Let me know if you agree in the comments below. You know the drill by now. And, as always, if you liked the video, even if you didn't like the video, hit the like and subscribe button, because it really does help me out. And until next time, everybody, peace out.